Hi guys, I'm Lauren Cooks Books and today you are watching a review. In November I finally finished reading The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry and I loved it, so I thought I would share my opinions with you. There are going to be a few spoilers dotted throughout this, but it's been out for like a year, guys. I know it's on my TBR for a full year, so I can't really judge, but I don't feel too bad about including the spoilers in this video. When this book first came out it was really hyped on BookTube and I was like, I can't wait for the paperback to come out, I need to spend £1 million on the hardback, and then it just sat dusting on my shelf for too long. But I finally got to it. It was sold to me via BookTube as a story about a lady scientist in the Victorian era or thereabouts, heading out into the uncharted wilderness of the surrounding villages of Essex in search of a mythical beast called the Essex Serpent. But I don't think this is really what the book's about. I think it's more a character-driven story about a woman's struggle to find her place in the world and trying out country life and rejecting a more refined life which constrained her in London. This book has a lot of characters, but it's not a character perspective story, it's written in close third person, and I really enjoyed how it wasn't a character per chapter. Every single chapter moved really fluidly between all of the characters to give you an overview of the full density of the story. In fact, the way it moved between these characters was really dynamic, and because they were often in different parts of the country, it felt like you were a first-person camera moving through the streets of London, looking at what everyone was doing, then zooming out to a whole map of the UK like you were some omnipresent cloud on the wind, and then zooming back in on Essex and the lives there, and it just flowed so nicely and it just gave so much energy and life to the story to be zooming across the country. As well as the main character Cora, all of the other characters were really fully realised and they all had a lot of goals and battles to fight for themselves. So for example, Dr. Luke Garrett, who is immediately introduced, in fact maybe the first character introduced at all in the story, he has this drive to be recognised and adored. He performs the most daring impossible operations known to man because he feels like he should be recognised for his genius and his skill. He also longs for the adoration of Cora, which he knows he will never get. Another main character is Reverend Will Ransom, the vicar of the village in Essex where most of the story is set. And his battle is much more of a one through faith and through ignorance, as he struggles to keep his congregation in line in the face of the myth of this beast. There is also a bit of a biblical battle going on for Will, because when Cora comes into his life she does so and creates a huge temptation for him. I really enjoyed how distinct the settings of London and Essex were in this book, but they weren't a complete dichotomy. Nearly all the characters moved very freely between the two to visit people, introduce people, pop back and forth for business, and just on holiday. But when they did move between the areas, it became very clear that there were two different kinds of people involved in this novel. And I kind of felt like when the characters who spent the majority of their time in town came to rural Essex, they did so in an altruistic way. They felt as if they were raising the standards of the people they were meeting and spending their time with, and as you can tell that makes me really uncomfortable because it was very classist, especially with the characters of Charles and Mrs. Ambrose. Catherine Ambrose, yeah. In London as well, a really deep texture of politics was developed throughout the novel. It was mostly done through Martha the maid's stories. She was a hardcore socialist. She was there waving a For the Many banner around, chanting, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn," like she was an edgy art student at a Russell Group uni. And she refused to marry this guy who was madly in love with her. Well, two guys who were madly in love with her, because she didn't want to marry into this patriarchal, oppressive regime. She just wanted to be their comrades and live with them in sin and fight for the greater good together. And honestly, she is a queen. I love her. She is one of my favourite characters I've read this year. I also love how she became this political femme fatale, emotionally manipulating men with the femininity that condemned her to being a second-class citizen, in order to change the law to get rich lobbyists on her side and affect MPs in votes. Oh, I love her. The politics in the village, however, is steeped deeply in myth and fear. The only authority is the church. It's very feudal. There are children casting spells. There are men who live near the lake where this monster has been seen, skinning animals and hanging them on fence posts to ward off evil. It feels like Will is fighting a losing battle against superstition, and even though he is a man of God, he is a very logical man, and he really struggles with the concept of this beast, just the way Cora struggles with the concept of a god. So again, there's this element of my feeling uncomfortable with how primitive the people of this town are painted to be, and I don't feel as if it was done in a way that was a discussion of class. I feel like it was an implicit judgment and an assumption made by the author about people who live in rural areas. Maybe that isn't the case. Maybe Sarah Perry was trying to say, hey guys, we shouldn't be judging these people because they have a different way of life to what we would consider normal. But I'm not fully sure that was the case. The other major issue I had with this book was, spoiler, the ending. I really struggled to come to terms with the fact that Cora so readily returned to the place where she'd been trapped for all these years in this vicious marriage where she had struggled with postnatal depression and been unable to communicate with her child. I struggled with the fact that she gave up on her dream and she became very distant from it, almost dissociative from the person she was in the village. She would look at these fossils that she'd collected and studied and she would feel nothing, but she would be back trapped in her London home, in the enforced refinery that she was like a bird in a cage in. Throughout the book there's always this kind of problematic vein as well about Cora and femininity. Whenever she felt free or adventurous, she would make a point of discussing how masculine and mannish she was and how very unlike a woman the character was, and it almost made me feel like to have a good time in life you have to be masculine. It's almost as though to have a good life a female gender is inferior and not up to that task. You have to fully embrace masculine traits just to do what you love. And to me, instead, it should have been a commentary on how that view of gender is harmful. There were some interesting forays into dealing with mental and physical health as well in this book. I feel like we could have used some more information on Francis the son and almost a classification, because it was just a very generic obsessive personality, and I think if it had been more honed and almost more identifiable, it would have done more good in this book than just having her strange distant son who liked to collect strange things and be creepy and hang around doorways. And also I think Cora should have tried to engage with him more, because it kind of gave the impression that it was alright to ignore people with mental illness. In terms of physical illness in this, one of the characters, Stella Ransom, develops TB and she starts to go delirious and become obsessed with the colour blue, and this reminded me of All the Hype on BookTube for Maggie Nelson's Bluettes, which I never read, but I'm almost considering picking it up now because the language used for Stella Ransom's thought processes was absolutely beautiful, and the way she collected blue objects and revered them was just, it was beautiful. You can't deny the language in this book is stunning. Another example of physical disability in this book is that Luke gets really badly injured and it sends him into a depression, and at first I wondered how harmful that would be to immediately equate a sudden physical disability with thoughts of suicide. And you know, I think she only just got away with pulling it round by. So I did have quite a lot of issues with this book in hindsight, but it was so stunning, so beautifully executed that I can't give it anything less than 4.5 stars. I would just say, don't believe all the hype before you go into it. It's not just a fun lady scientist romp through the Essex countryside. It's a very character-driven story, and there is a lot of baggage with each of these characters. So that's all from me today. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I will see you again tomorrow. Bye!